emulators were used in the production of this podcast.
Where did you learn to podcast? That good?
That's awesome, sweetie. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, the show where we take a good long look at Atari's last home video game console and its library, one game at a time. Whether you're new to the Jaguar, an owner since day one, or just curious about this unique system, I'm glad you're here. I am Shinto, second runner-up assistant scribe to King Fluffy the First of the planet Phromaj, and in this episode we're putting everything in its place in part number J9040, FlipOut. FlipOut, stylized as one word, capital F, capital O, and with an exclamation point at the end, is a pattern-matching sort of puzzle game for one player, developed by Guerrilla Systems Corporation and published by Atari in August of 1995. It carries an ESRB rating of K to A, kids to adults, ages 6+. Guerrilla Systems Corporation was an American software development company founded in late 1989 by Jonathan O'Neill Brown and Warren G. Brown, brothers, I think, in Oldsmar, Florida. They started out not working on games, but on software for Windows. This would have been around Windows 3.1, and included productivity software such as Guerrilla Banking and Guerrilla Forms. In 1994, Time Warner launched a trial service in up to 4,000 households in the Orlando, Florida area, which was called the Full Service Network. Quoting from an article in the New York Times, linked in the show notes, here's what the service promised to do. Viewers will turn on their television sets to see a rotating carousel on the screen that will allow them to select and watch specific movies at any time of day, shop in an electronic mall, and play what promise to be grippingly realistic video games. Entering the mall, viewers will pass by graphical representations of storefronts, and they will be able to view video displays of products from Spiegel, Eddie Bauer, Crate and Barrel, and other merchants. A printer next to each television will be able to deliver tickets, discount coupons, and printed information. The service required a set-top box that was powered by Silicon Graphics hardware. It cost $3,000. SGI hardware was not cheap. I remember drooling over ads for the SGI Indie Workstation, which cost $5,000 back then, which, sounds like a lot, but it was cheap for a Silicon Graphics workstation, and did include a monitor and a webcam. Guerrilla Systems Corporation worked on some of the apps for the Full Service Network. The FSN trial lasted about 18 months before shutting down. It was an expensive venture, no doubt, but convinced Time Warner that on-demand video had promise, and here we are 20-some years later. On-demand video is ubiquitous with your Hulus and your Netflixes and your Amazon's Prime, so Time Warner was certainly onto something there. Back to Guerrilla Systems, according to Moby Games, FlipOut is their first title, which makes their vanity screen all the more confusing, something to look forward to later this episode. FlipOut is sort of the anomaly in Guerrilla's software history, which is filled with games published for Mattel Media, Disney Interactive, Majesco, and THQ, among others, games which focused on the young girls demographic. There were several Barbie games, tie-ins for movies such as Monsters, Inc., Lilo and Stitch, Little Mermaid, and Spy Kids, plus other properties like Hannah Montana, Nancy Drew, and Strawberry Shortcake.
Strawberry Shortcake, wouldn't you know?
Platforms for which Guerrilla Systems developed these games include the Game Boy Advance, Nintendo DS, the Wii, and computer platforms, Windows and Mac. The last release I see from Guerrilla Systems is about 10 years ago, 2008, and the company seems to have officially dissolved in 2013. Their website is still online, though, gorilla.com, which is a great domain name. FlipOut was the brainchild of Dr. Conrad Barski, a medical doctor and software engineer. Mr. Barski, before the doctorate, developed an interest in computers around the age of 9 or 10 when his parents bought a TI-99 4A computer. He got started programming on that, later moving on to the Commodore 64, but when he got to thinking about a career, he thought medical software applications sounded pretty interesting, so he started a pre-med program at Palmetto College in Florida. This sounds to me, if I could use a purely fictional reference, like Dana Scully in The X-Files. She was a medical doctor and used that to assist in fieldwork at the FBI. So it's kind of like that, I think, but in real life and with programming, not hunting down aliens and monsters of the week and stuff. I love me some X-Files, though, don't get me wrong. Mr. Barski, while at Palmetto, worked part-time as a developer for Guerrilla Systems, starting in 1992. In fact, if you were ordering a pizza using your TV on the full-service network in mid-90s Orlando and marveled at the realism of the computer-rendered pizza, you can thank Mr. Barski and his fractal pizza crust algorithm. The idea for FlipOut came from juggling. When you're juggling, be it tennis balls or bowling pins or flaming chainsaws, you always have at least one more object than you have hands, and in FlipOut you have one more tile than you have spaces. Add in some random aliens to mess with you in various ways, and you have, I think, a pretty solid game concept. Andy Rifkin, have you heard of him? He's led a fascinating career. Even if you're not familiar with the name, you're probably familiar with some of his work. He was VP of Development for Mattel Media, leading the creation, development, and production of a number of Barbie and Hot Wheels toys. Do you remember Atari founder Nolan Bushnell's year 2000 startup called U-Wink? Rifkin was Chief Technology Officer for that. He worked with Harmonix to develop Rock Band, and from what I can tell, he currently works as Senior VP of Product Development for Hanson Robotics. At least that's as of 2016. I bring up Mr. Rifkin because among all those other places, he worked for Time Warner Cable and was Vice President of Interactive Application Technology during the full-service network days. Therefore, in this capacity, he worked with Guerrilla Systems on their FSN apps. He and Jonathan Brown started talking about Guerrilla Systems making an Atari Jaguar game. Time Warner, you may remember, was a major shareholder of Atari and signed an agreement in July of 1994 regarding the use of Jaguar technology in Time Warner arcade games, and allowed for some of Time Warner's games on the Jaguar. So there was a relationship going on with Atari, and it was fresh in everyone's minds at the time. Anyway, they approached Conrad Barski one Friday afternoon and said, "Hey, we're thinking about making a Jaguar game. Do you think you could put together a concept idea that might work?" Mr. Barski, being both a gamer and an Atari fanboy, worked all weekend on his FlipOut concept, and on Monday presented them with a complete game proposal. They loved it, accepted the idea, and ran with it. You can actually view this proposal online, thanks to Scott Stillifin and The Lost Dragon. It's up on the Atari Mania website, and I'll include a link in the show notes. It mentions game concepts that didn't make it into the final product, which I might talk about in more detail later this episode. From Atari, Guerrilla Systems and Conrad Barski would get $25,000 plus royalties. There were 4 other programmers and 4 more artists and animators working on the game, and there was a bit of overlap between these roles. For example, Mr. Barski did the initial concept artwork plus some of the early 3D modeling, and Mike Taylor worked on both art and the title theme song. The game took 8 months to develop, which is a pretty short time frame given how the Guerrilla Systems team was very new to this whole Jaguar thing, and it was hard to get good technical information in what was effectively a pre-internet culture. Guerrilla Systems later went on to port the game to Windows and DOS as well through the publisher GameTech. The original plan was to publish through Atari Interactive, which was Atari's short-lived publishing arm for home computers. How short-lived was it? Well, the division was announced January 2nd of 1996 and shut down about 2 weeks later. Tempest 2000 for the PC was the only game actually shipped under this label. I'm not sure if FlipOut for the PC ever got an actual release in the United States, an official release, though it did see release in the UK, France, and Germany, the latter two distributed by Acclaim Entertainment. I'll talk more about the PC port of this game and how it differs from the Jaguar version later on in the show. Continuing on with Dr. Barski post-Guerrilla Systems, he is the author and co-author of several books, including Land of Lisp, Learning to Program in Lisp One Game at a Time, in which he also handled all the illustrations. I've got to read a line out of a review for this book on Amazon. It says, "If for no other reason, you should buy Land of Lisp because of the extreme levels of unadulterated nerdery filling its pages." I don't have any practical experience with Lisp, but I might just have to check this book out. I'll include a link to this book plus a couple of others in the show notes, going to Barnes & Noble instead of Amazon, just to be different. Because of his experience in functional programming, Dr. Barski was interviewed on the Functional Geekery podcast, episode 38, and there's a link to that in the show notes as well. It's a long interview, and he touches on both his background as well as writing games, so take a listen if you're interested. Arcade Attack published an interview with Mike Price in June of 2018, just about 2 months ago as I record this, and Mr. Price had some hand in playtesting Atari Jaguar games, including FlipOut, though in what official capacity I'm not sure. He's not listed in the game credits as a tester, and while he did work for Electronic Gaming Monthly, I believe that was several years later, according to the interview. But anyway, he said that he was tasked with playing the game, playing it all the way through at the Guerrilla Systems office, and offer his feedback. He had the impression that they were working under a tight deadline, and his suggestions ultimately did not make it into the final product. The full review is linked in the show notes. On June 20th, 1995, Atari hosted a press event at their headquarters in Sunnyvale, California, with a Fun and Games theme. The idea was to get all these media companies together and show them what's brewing for the Jaguar. You can find the entire account of this event in the July edition of Atari Explorer Online, linked in the show notes, but what I wanted to mention here was that in addition to Atari-branded swag, hats, pens, keychains, mugs, each attendee was given a copy of FlipOut, this must have been hot off the assembly line, and Blue Lightning, the CD game coming up in episode 34 of this podcast. In fact, several publications reviewed both Blue Lightning and FlipOut in the same issue, like GamePro, Next Generation, and Game Players, possibly the very same copies they took home from this event. FlipOut was available in stores mid-August of 1995 at an MSRP of just under $50 US. The Great Tile Flipping Festival. I'm sure you've heard of it. It's all the rage on the planet Phromaj, that's spelled Phromaj, also called the Cheese Planet. Is it coincidence that the French word for cheese, while spelled differently, is pronounced just the same and means the same thing? I don't think so. I'm reminded of the Douglas Adams Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy books. The third one, I believe. What was that? Life, the Universe, and Everything? Maybe. In this book, it's learned that the game Cricket actually has its basis on a remote alien planet, spelled differently but pronounced the same. Some concepts of the ancient planet of Cricket had been passed down through racial memory over the eons and ended up as the basis for a game here on Earth, so perhaps something similar is going on here with this Phromaj thing. Anyway, the Great Tile Flipping Festival is not merely a popular Phromaj pastime, no, it's actually the basis for what appears to be a planet-wide meritocracy. The better you do in the tournament, the higher your social standing, going all the way up to the tile-flipping champion who becomes the Phromaj king. King Fluffy, somewhat ironically named because all the people of Phromaj seem to have smooth, shiny skin with gelatinous bodies, King Fluffy, of course, is the tile-flipping Grand Master and therefore Supreme Ruler, and he really likes his crown and snazzy robe, so he'll stop at nothing to maintain his squishy grip on that glorious headpiece and the power that comes with it. You, a human of all creatures, have been invited to participate. Why you? I don't know. Maybe King Fluffy doesn't think you pose much of a threat. Feel free to prove him wrong, because if you want the title and the glory, you're going to have to go through him. At its core, FlipOut is about flipping tiles and other objects in the air to match patterns on the ground. There's always one more tile or whatever than there are spaces, so you'll always be keeping at least one object in the air, like juggling. Wait too long and it'll fall. Gravity is indeed a harsh mistress. There are no lives, no arbitrary limit to the number of retries. You just keep going till you either succeed or give up. You move a cursor around the playfield. Its actual appearance can differ depending on the level, but most of the time it's a white square with red stripes, or is that a red square with white stripes? Either way, the stripes move around in a marquee fashion. You move this cursor around and push a button to flip the tile or whatever in the air. The previously flipped tile will land where the next flipped tile just was. Does that make sense? This is the key to playing the game. Flip a tile, move the cursor to where you want the tile to go, and then flip whatever's there. So, for example, if you flip a green tile, and then flip a red tile that's sitting on a green spot, the green one will land where the red one just was, and give you a match. The next tile you flip, the red one will land there. You just keep going like this, matching patterns on the ground until you match them all. To help you out, the tile will flash when it's in the correct spot, and you'll get a clinking noise when it lands there. I like that sound. Since there's always one extra, that's going to be the last one that you want to flip, because ideally, you've already filled out the pattern. The instant the pattern is filled correctly, the round ends. The extra tile or whatever remains flipping in the air, you get a round of cheers from spectators and competitors alike. They're all good sports between rounds. There's no practical limit to the number of tiles that you can have in the air at one time, beyond, of course, the total number of tiles in that level. You're limited only by your ability to keep them all straight, and if you're in the zone, that number can easily be 3 or 4, maybe even more than that. At the start of each round, all the tiles are where they need to be, plus one extra off to the side. King Fluffy waves his magical appendages and sets things in motion amidst a flurry of mini lightning bolts, casting many of the tiles, including the extra, up in the air. A few may be left on the ground initially, but will soon fly off on their own. The rest is up to you. Better get moving before that extra one falls. There's no time limit in each phase per se, but the faster you complete the pattern, the better, for 2 reasons. First, you get a higher score. The score is based off of the number of flips it takes to match the pattern. And second, faster may mean less meddling that you have to put up with. See, there are spectators at these events, and then there are competitors. You can tell them apart by their skin color. This isn't a racial segregation thing or profiling or anything, because Phromagians, I believe, are able to change their skin color at will, and the spectators wear green skin as a courtesy. That's the impression I get, but I'm a podcaster, not a Phromaj apologist. Sometimes these spectators do get wrapped up in the excitement and wander out onto the playfield, but they don't usually cause any mischief. They just cannonball up in the air if they're standing on a tile that's flipped, and get squished if one lands on top of them. Phromagians have no bones, so this squishing action doesn't actually hurt them. I think they like getting squished, actually, but I know little of Phromaj psychology. That wasn't a class they offered at any of the schools I went to, surprisingly. Competitors wear red skin. You are technically part of the competitor class, but you messing with other competitors, that isn't a feature in this game. Sorry. They get to mess with you, though, and increase their social status in doing so. The best you can do is defy them or wait them out, finish each challenge, and move on. If you include King Fluffy, which you should, there are 12 different competitors who will want to make your job a flipping chore. Each one does something different, and several of them are level specific, so I think what I'll do here is talk about the levels first, and then go back to talk about the competitors so that you have some context for competitor behavior. Each level is broken up into phases. You have a number of rounds that you need to complete in that level before you can move on to the next level. How scoring in this game works is that there is a maximum number of points per phase. Every time you flip a tile, that number decreases by 1, and you're rewarded whatever remains after you clear that phase. So, for example, in a level with a maximum of 100 points per phase, if it takes you 12 flips to complete one of the phases, you're awarded 88 points for that. Each level can have a different number of points per phase, and I'll list those off as we go along. This may be podcast-exclusive information. I couldn't find the scoring breakdown anywhere, and Dr. Barski didn't remember how the scoring was set up, so through a fair bit of playtesting and a little bit of cheating, I have the numbers for each level. Hey, Bishop. Can I have a sound effect for when I'm about to present some podcast-exclusive info?
No.
Oh. Alright. In addition to points and number of phases and overall theme, each level also has its own music. Well, mostly. So I'll be playing the level music in the background, too. Here we go. First up is Cheese World. You did remember the crackers, didn't you?
No crackers, Gromit. We've forgotten the crackers.
This is where you start out, and it gives you a good introduction to the gameplay mechanics, how the flipping works. There are 11 phases you'll need to complete here, each one carries a maximum of 100 points, and you'll start out with just a couple tile colors. The stage itself is an orange surface pitted with Swiss cheese-like holes, though you'd be excused for thinking that the whole surface looks like a mass of chocolate chip cookie dough, which is a different kind of delicious. Once cooked, of course, nothing spoils a tile-flipping festival like salmonella poisoning. An Earth-like planet and moon appear in the starless background, lit from above by an unknown star. Maybe this is supposed to be Earth and its moon, but I'd think we'd have noticed if we had a cheese world orbiting nearby. Or maybe it can move around like the Death Star and it's just visiting. There's a bluish-gray scoreboard perched atop a metallic pedestal, and the king watches from halfway up the cheesy hill that rises behind the playfield. To his left, our right, is a platform with 3 cheerleader aliens doing their cheerleading thing with leaps, flips, and spins. We'll be seeing them again. The playfield is a 3x3 grid, and you start off with all tiles the same color, save one, and each phase gradually introduces more colors and patterns as you go along. I don't think you see any competitors until the very last round. The next level takes us to Yellowstone. Yes, Yellowstone National Park, tucked into the northwest corner of the state of Wyoming, but also spilling a bit into neighboring Montana to the north and Idaho to the west. Why are we here? Well, the Phromaj like visiting Earth and taking in some landmarks. This is one of 3 terrestrial destinations we'll be visiting here on this planet. So yeah, Yellowstone. There are 5 total phases here. Each one also has a maximum of 100 points. You're in a small green valley with a canopy of deep green leaves overhead. The scoreboard sits atop a spindly metal tower, and the king has his own little king perch up toward the rim of this little valley. A diving board is situated along the right edge, where a skinny yellow water wings wearing alien prepares to jump in. That's essentially your extra tile. The playfield is made up of 6 colored geysers, with goggle-wearing aliens in colors that match their geysers riding atop the scalding hot water plumes. Move your cursor over each geyser and push the button to make that geyser erupt, launching the alien into the air. The geysers are not laid out in a nice grid. Nature is inconvenient that way, so selecting the right one may be a little tricky at first. Following Yellowstone, we head due east to Mount Rushmore. There are 3 phases in this one, each good for up to 150 points. Though of course you'll never actually reach that number, gotta flip to win after all. You're looking slightly down on Mount Rushmore in the South Dakota Badlands, with the carved visages of American presidents George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Theodore Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln from left to right, each split into 4 horizontal rectangular chunks. Isn't it a felony to deface a national monument? Does that law not apply to extraterrestrials? And the term defacing doesn't get any more literal than this. These pieces are not bound by gravity, but by proximity to the rest of the mountain. Therefore, chunks left floating too long will crash into the side of the mountain itself. The extra piece here is a pair of googly eyes, black pupils moving in all directions. On top of this major batholithic formation, you'll see a small shack with a metal roof and stovepipe surrounded by a couple of pine trees and some clouds off in the background. The scoreboard is framed in and held up by the same type of rock as the rest of the mountain, so I guess that would make it granite. King Fluffy is conspicuous in his absence here. Must be arranging his alibi for that whole national monument defacing thing. There are no colors here, no etching under the chunks of stone, so you kind of need to memorize the faces of America's 1st, 3rd, 16th, and 25th presidents in order to get them into the right spot. You need to know their foreheads, chins, noses, and eyes, and where they belong on the mountain, so this level is pretty tricky. I'm glad there are only 3 phases. Are you done with Earth? I'm done with Earth. So after Mount Rushmore, we travel an unknown distance to the maybe-orbiting Sphorcal Diner. And there we need to get through 5 phases, each with a max of 100 points. You're in a large room with a white and gray checkerboard pattern on the floor. Positioned in the center of this room are 6 tables, each table with a colored alien set up behind it, and a matching colored glob of pulsing gelatinous goop. These aliens are anxious to eat and lean forward, waving their arms in the air, pretending to chomp down. Along the back edge of the visible room are bar stools, and King Fluffy has his throne set up in front of them, facing the diner's tables. He has to peer under the large scoreboard held up by purple pillars, below which you might find a purple robot of some sort moving about. Oddly, Mr. Potato Head is here in the background. Or maybe it's his cousin or something. Either way, I'm guessing he's thankful that this diner doesn't serve french fries. Get it? French fries because he's a... never mind. We're back on Earth now, with the small and mysterious chunk of land in the Pacific Ocean known as Easter Island, called Rapa Nui by its Polynesian inhabitants, and mostly known for the gigantic moai statues, the giant heads, most of which have long since toppled. Intentionally. Now, conventional wisdom holds that this island was first settled by Polynesian explorers who carved these moai and moved them to their places on the island. But I read a fascinating hypothesis recently that the moai may have been in fact carved by an earlier civilization, pre-Incan, originating from modern-day Peru or Chile, people who were much more known for their mad stone-cutting skills than the Polynesians who had their mad seafaring skills. Perhaps the Tiwanaku Empire, in or around the last ice age, which may have exposed tips of the Sala y Gomez Range as a chain of islands which would pretty much lead directly from Chile to Easter Island at the end of the ridge. I'll include a link to that hypothesis in the show notes. It's not a peer-reviewed study or anything, more like armchair archaeology, but I found it interesting and highly plausible. I've looked into Tiwanaku previously in my youth, and they were seriously adept stonecutters, so it kind of makes sense. Back to the actual game, the one that I'm covering here in this episode, you are on Easter Island and you have a 2x3 grid of tiles on the ground in front of 3 moai heads who are able to open and close their mouths. Inside each mouth is another tile, essentially making this a 3x3 grid. The trick is, you can't flip the tiles when the mouths are closed, only when they're open. The cursor is a skateboard-looking contraption, a physical object that, like the tiles, cannot enter or leave a closed moai mouth. You could therefore become trapped for a few seconds until the mouth opens again. Perched atop the moai on our right is King Fluffy, sitting in his usual throne. The scoreboard hangs over the statues held up by a large metal stand off to one side. There are 4 stages in this one, and this is the last time your score will be based off of a 100-point max. Things start to get kind of weird now with Hoopla World, apparently an entire planet based around the American sport of basketball. The playfield is on a basketball court, inside the key on a wooden floor. The cheerleaders are back, they're on a wooden table decorated with a wavy red banner. There's no basketball net visible, and I'm having a hard time making out what the back wall is supposed to be. It seems like gray and white panels with big chunks missing. The basketball goal, if it existed, might have been a gameplay factor according to the original design document, but more on that later. This is another 3x3 grid, so if you liked the traditional feel introduced in level 1, you'll be right at home here. And this familiarity is also bolstered by the same music that you heard in level 1. There are 10 phases here, each with 120 points as the maximum. If you have a world dedicated to basketball, you should also have a world dedicated to not hockey, not soccer, not lacrosse, but American football, of course. Planet Pigskin is next. Yeah, same music again. The cheerleader table is the same as well, the tile set and appearance is the same, but now you are near the end zone of an American football field. The lines of the gridiron aren't quite right, but they're aliens recreating this. We'll give them some slack. Just like Hoopla World, you have 10 phases, but now each phase is worth up to 10 points more. 130 is your starting score per phase. Ready to go somewhere different? Let's check out the Zero Gravity Arena. Now this is interesting. Instead of a 3x3 grid on the floor, you have a 3x3 grid in space. Also a perpendicular 3x2 grid behind it, and another perpendicular 3x2 grid along the left edge. It's like you're looking at a room. The floor and 2 walls are covered in tiles, 21 tile slots in all, so with the extra that's 22 tiles to worry about. There are no spectators here, you can hear them but can't see them, and there's no King Fluffy to get things started. Instead, you only start off with a couple of tiles in the air, which is good because there's a crazy number of tiles here, and it's hard to keep them all straight. Also, given the steep angle at which you're viewing some of these tiles, it can be hard to see what the color is supposed to be until you flip it. You may spend some time juggling a couple of tiles in place to try to figure out which ones aren't where they belong. At least I do that. In the background are cratered moons and twinkling stars beyond. Well, a few of them twinkle. There's also a wispy red emission nebula out there and a couple of closer stars. There are only 5 phases to complete in the Zero Gravity Arena, but each one will take a while. Your point total start off at 150, which may not be as generous as it sounds. Finally, we go mono off Phromaggio with the big cheese himself, King Fluffy. The text on the screen reads, King Fluffy challenges you to a one-on-one match. The winner will become king of the cheese planet. You're back on Cheese World, and it looks a lot like level 1, except the surface is perhaps a bit more yellow than orange. There are no spectators, and the cheerleader stand is likewise empty. It's just you and the king, and a 4x4 grid of tiles, 16 total plus 1 extra. This is a one-round, winner-take-all contest, and your score counter begins at 1,000 points. We've been through the levels, so here's a list of who's going to be working against you. Note that you can sometimes see more than one of these on the playfield in later phases and levels. This, the manual points out, is because of temporary cloning, where the competitors make a copy of themselves to further mess with you and thus increase their status in society. I would love to get my hands on this technology. Think of all I could get done around the house and with this podcast, but the Phromaj aren't sharing their advanced techno-gadgets with me. First up, the rodeo rider. According to the manual, this guy was accidentally stranded in Lawton, Oklahoma on one of his visits to Earth, taking a job as a rodeo clown, later moving up to bull riding. Is that a common career path? I don't know. I have a history with rodeos that makes me avoid them and anything similar, so I don't know how common it is to go from clown to bull rider. Anyway, when he was eventually retrieved by his people, he used his newfound bull riding skills to compete in the tile flipping festival. So what this guy does is grab onto one of the tiles and hold on tight, pinning it to the ground. You have to try to flip the tile repeatedly in order to get him off. He's easy to pick out in the crowd, being the only Phromagian to wear a big old cowboy hat. Next we have the Red Baron. He wears goggles and a scarf and can fly by flapping his arms. He'll fly over to the tile board and take the place of one of the tiles, essentially forcing you to keep 2 tiles in the air for a while, not just 1. The Tile Eater is a circus sideshow performer turned tile flipping competitor, and what he'll do is go over and swallow one of your tiles, obscuring its color and preventing it from ever really landing. Even if it's in the right spot, it won't click into place because it's not actually touching the ground, it's got tile eater skin in the way. Flip him a few times and he'll cough up the tile and go back to the sidelines. The cursor decoy has a strange backstory. Apparently, the planet Phromaj wasn't always a meritocracy, but a hereditary democracy where the same few families always seem to be the ones getting elected. This old ruling class, which doesn't really do much these days other than attend parties and appear in the news, the manual says, this ruling class has a member who wanted to join the rest of society and enter the tile-flipping festival. And this guy is the cursor decoy. He's a shape changer and can make himself look a whole lot like your red and white cursor, but with eyeballs on the front. He'll move around the board trying to confuse you, and if you don't flip him off,
Excuse me?
That is, eject him from the board, he'll start flipping your tiles, which is kind of irritating. The cursor decoy has a cousin called the tile flipper. Guess what he does? He's not a shapeshifter, nor is he technically part of the old ruling class. Instead, he worked in factories, and upon hearing of the cursor decoy's annoying success in the festival, he decided, hey, I can be annoying too. So he left his job and entered the festival, where he simply walks around the board and throws your tiles up into the air. Sounds like an irritating wannabe, if you ask me. There's more to Phromaj than just rotund bipeds with skinny arms and big googly eyes. There's also another sentient species with squishy, largely formless bodies and big googly eyes. One of these is in the festival, and his name is Gooey. He squishily hops around the board and blocks tiles, but you can't flip him away. You have to wait for him to finish his little trek, after which point he'll leave on his own. In the volcanic mountains of Phromaj, you might find bands of wild geyser beasts roaming about. Geyser beasts, as we all know, are dangerous and intimidating because of their lightning-fast reflexes, but also are known for their nigh-insatiable thirst for geyser water, which contains the mineral nutrients they need to survive. The competitor named Corky was raised by wild geyser beasts. Nobody is exactly sure why, but he picked up many of their dominant traits, except for the intimidating part, largely because of his flowery swimming cap. He only inhabits the Yellowstone level, and what he does while you're trying to compete is he latches onto a geyser, sucking down water and preventing you from landing anything there until you get him to leave by trying to flip him a few times. Speaking of level-specific opponents, we come to the janitor and his nemesis, the graffiti master. In the Mount Rushmore level, the graffiti master will paint pieces with Glopple-Glorp. The janitor will come by to clean it off, but in the meantime, you can't flip those pieces. The graffiti master kind of has a frog-like face, and both he and the janitor use hoverboards to reach up that high. By the last Mount Rushmore phase, there are 2 graffiti masters, but only 1 janitor. We're getting close to the end of the list now, just a few more. The next one is a dog, sort of a Phromaj breed that looks very slug-like and has the name Sluggy. It's probably a very common name, like naming your golden retriever Goldie, but Sluggy wears a spiked collar and hangs out at the Sforkle Diner, where he has special permission to mess with the contestants on behalf of his owner, the guy who runs the diner. Sluggy will jump from table to table, which is both obstructive and unsanitary. When Sluggy's on a table, you can't land any platters on it. In later phases, there may be another Sluggy, a Sluggy clone out there working the tables. The Wizard is another level-specific opponent hanging out around Easter Island. He has the ability to freeze tiles in place, and you need to try flipping that tile several times in order to break it free from its icy prison. He can also paint individual tiles a different color until you flip them, thus disguising the true color, which is kind of annoying. But not as annoying as the space slime. I don't like these guys at all. They live in the asteroid belt, which happens to be where somebody decided to build a zero-gravity arena. They'll land their squishy blob-like bodies on your tiles and move around, flipping tiles as they go. You get rid of them for a short time by flipping them, but, I often cause even more damage chasing after these buggers trying to flip them than they cause themselves. Finally, we come to the Supreme Ruler, the head honcho, the Grand Poobah, Grand Master King Fluffy himself. Like the Wizard, King Fluffy can freeze tiles, repaint them until flipped, and he also has a habit of relaunching a bunch of tiles just to mess with you. Now, dealing with these individual competitors can increase your score. I think it's around 10 points per competitor, though I didn't check all of them. You also get points for flipping and squishing spectators. That would be 5 points and 3 points, respectively. So, what happens if you're able to defeat King Fluffy on his own turf? I'll tell you what happens if you want, but Bishop and I have a way of giving you the option to skip these details if you wanted to preserve the mystery for yourself. Bishop, activate spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Spoiler alert. If you wish to avoid spoilers, skip ahead 1 minute 33 seconds on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark.
Defeats King Fluffy, and he has a little animation where he looks surprised, his crown vanishes, and then he hangs his head in shame, or maybe it's more of a facepalm, as the score is tallied. After the score, we see a new screen, a wooden stage with large red curtains in the back and 6 lights in the front. 8 Phromaj aliens with canes and top hats are up on stage, illuminated by spotlights. We get some new music. While we see these 8 aliens move around the stage, forming each letter of the title FlipOut in turn, followed by an exclamation point. As they move, they each hold up their cane in one hand and hat with the other, shaking the hat back and forth, doing a little twirl before landing in their place for each letter. After they form that exclamation point at the end, we get the cheering sound. And then it's off to the high score screen. On the Cheese Planet background, devoid of aliens and tiles and music, you have the text "Enter your initials." Below the 3 initials is the text "up/down to change, left/right to select, fire to continue." Oddly, every word here has the first letter capitalized except for the word right. Strange. After you're done entering your initials, you see the high score table, 10 scores, and you're pretty much stuck here until you reset the Jaguar.
End of spoilers. The remainder of this episode is spoiler-free, unless aliens come and mess it up.
Always a risk. Controls in the game are about as straightforward as they come. The D-pad moves your cursor around, and any one of the fire buttons will cause the cursor to flip the tile, or whatever. There you go. Okay, there is a little bit more that I can talk about. How about the option button? In-game, you can push the option button to bring up a menu. The screen darkens, well, at least the background does. Tiles and aliens and stuff remain at full brightness. The menu is presented in white text and includes the menu items Master Volume, Music Volume, Save Game, Load Game, Exit Options, and Exit to Map. A somersaulting green alien indicates which option on the menu is currently selected. For Master Volume and Music Volume, you move a green sluggy left or right to decrease or increase the volume respectively, and a button to return to the option menu. The Save Game and Load Game I'll talk about a little later. Exit Options returns you to the game already in progress, and Exit to Map will bail out of the current level and take you back to the level selection map, which I'll talk about here pretty soon. Pressing Option again will close the in-game options menu, just as if you selected the Exit Options menu item at the bottom. Right next to the Option button is the Pause button. Use this to pause a game. The game background will darken, just as if you hit the Option button, but this time you get a giant paused graphic, blue letters on an aluminum foil-looking background. You can push 1 and 3 to hide the paused graphic and restore the screen to full brightness, good for screenshots, except the game does actually unpause for a fraction of a second when you do this. If you have tiles in the air, these tiles will tumble a bit. Push 1 and 3 and then pause again while the graphic is hidden to redisplay the paused graphic, and tumble those tiles a little bit more. If you time it right, using this glitch, you can lose the match while the game is technically paused. Yay? While paused, with a paused graphic displayed, you can push A to adjust the master volume by moving sluggy left and right, and B to adjust the music volume. When the music is set to 0 here, you can actually still hear the music, just a little bit. From the volume adjustment, push any fire button to go back to the paused graphic. While you can pause the game on the title screen and possibly elsewhere, you cannot use it to bring up the volume controls except during gameplay, which is kind of weird. The keypad is not officially used except for the 0 button to mute the music, and the star and hash together to reset the Jaguar. That said, though, I did notice that some of the keypad buttons occasionally mimic D-pad actions. The 3 button can move the cursor to the right, 6 can move it to the left, 9 down, and hash up. It's rare that this works, but I have been able to make it happen during gameplay and on the map screen. It might have been nice to be able to use the keypad to flip tiles. Most levels are a 3x3 grid, and your keypad essentially contains a 3x3 grid, so a 1-to-1 mapping might have worked. But again, only on certain levels. I don't know, it's a thought. Alright, let's boot up the game. After the Jaguar logo and Atari jingle and rotating cube, we see the text, "Another great game brought to you by ... with the first 3 words capitalized for some reason. This screen will hang around for 12 seconds. That's a long time. But what it's doing in the background, I'm pretty sure, is loading up the animated vanity screen for Gorilla Systems. You open with the circle wipe, revealing a monochrome image, the word gorilla appearing on the top of a hill in large rough-hewn stone letters, and positioned in front of this hill, you see the silhouette of a rock formation with 2 pillars. The pillar on the left holds a TV, and a primate of some sort, probably a gorilla, sits on the other pillar. You see the primate reach over, pick up a controller, and start hopping up and down on his pillar. When he does this, you hear what sounds an awful lot like the sunrise fanfare from Richard Strauss's Also Sprach Zarathustra, of course made famous by the Stanley Kubrick movie 2001: A Space Odyssey. Here's what it sounds like. You cannot hit a button to skip any of this until right after the circle wipe, which is kinda lame, but fortunately you only see this screen when booting up the game initially, not when hitting reset. You may remember back in the Brutal Sports Football episode, I said that the Telegames intro is one of the 2 most pretentious vanity screens in the Jaguar library, and this game here, FlipOut, is the other. I like the gorilla animation a lot. It's smooth and classy, but the part that bugs me is the "Another Great Game" screen, and that there's no way to skip it. I didn't ask about this specifically, but according to Moby Games at least, FlipOut is Gorilla's first game, so to say "another great game" is, deceptively forward-thinking. Oh wait, I think they might have also done a game for the Full Service Network, a checkers game. But the odd capitalization here bothers me. Yeah, I'm shallow like that. After the gorilla screen, you get a brief cut to dark blue, and then another circle wipe, this time revealing the title screen, and before the circle wipe completes, the theme song kicks off too. The background is an abstract purple design. I can't describe what it's supposed to be, I guess because it's abstract, but you can see various shades of purple with lighter spots, and what looks like dark creases running throughout. I like it. In front of the background, you have the name of the game, the word flip slightly running over the top of out, both in a cyan color with hard-edged lettering and sort of a beveled look. There's a neat little animation with the title. The U, T, and exclamation point will shrink down, and the O will roll over to where they were. The word flip takes this opportunity to become a little more horizontal, but it's short-lived because the O rolls back, and the other letters grow back to their original size. It adds a dynamic flair to the title screen, and I've always liked how this looks. Below the title are 2 menu options in white text, with the current option denoted by the same somersaulting green alien we saw before. Either this guy has an iron stomach, or maybe Phromagians don't get dizzy and sick, because if it were me, I'd be puking my guts out before too long. The menu text, and indeed most of the text throughout the game, is in a fixed-width font, like a typewriter font, but with the letters not quite lining up. Their vertical position differs, rising above the baseline, which gives the text a more haphazard, whimsical flair. The attract mode starts after about 12 or 13 seconds of inactivity. You'll get a circle wipe transition to the cheese world, where you'll see the high scores. By default, there are 10 scores ranging from 7 through 854. Each one has a set of 3 initials next to it, but the default initials don't seem to match up to anything, not the developers or whatever. You see these for 7 seconds and then get a little bit of a demo. There are about a dozen spectators milling about, and a competitor as well, usually the Red Baron or Rodeo Rider or Space Slime.
I think you mean Gooey.
Whatever. The 3 cheerleaders are here, but the king is not. His throne looks invitingly empty. The tiles ascend into the air even without the king's magical influence, and the cursor quickly moves to each tile in the 3x3 grid in sequence, attempting to flip whatever's there. Despite there being no effort to actually match the tiles, a few do clink into place by sheer luck. The scoreboard is here, but displays nothing. After about 30 seconds of pseudo-gameplay action, the level ends as if you've won, and we circle wipe back to the main menu. Left alone, it'll continue this sequence with only slight competitor variations in the gameplay footage. You can push a button to go back to the main menu. If you do so during the little demo, it'll end just as if you won. The main menu includes New Game, selected by default, and Options. If we go to Options, we get another screen. Same purple background with a text-only menu containing the options Load Game, Difficulty, Credits, and Exit Options. You can also get to this menu using the Options button, which is kind of a shortcut compared to the 2 controller actions necessary using the main menu. There's a heck of a pro tip. FlipOut has 5 save game slots, which is a lot. Selecting Load Game will list out these slots on the Cheese World background. Each slot shows the initials, 3 letters, the level number, or rather the total phase number, 1 through 54, and 1 letter indicating the difficulty. N for normal, H for hard, I for insane, and P for psychotic. Select the slot with the spinning green alien, push a button, and then you'll be given the option to change the difficulty level, selecting from those 4 I just listed. After that, it's off to the specific level and phase number from the saved game slot. The save game screen, which, remember, you access from the in-game options menu, is a pretty similar process. You select a save game slot, there's a menu just like the load game screen, and once you select the slot, you're given the option to enter your initials. Change up the initials for that slot using up and down on the keypad to cycle through the letters, and left and right to move between the 3 initials. Your score is not saved, just your current overall phase number and difficulty. The difficulty levels are the next item on the options menu, this here affecting a new game. Let's talk about what these actually mean. There are 4 difficulty levels, and the menu here lists them out. They start at normal, then move up to hard, insane, and psychotic. Normal is just as I've described so far. That's the game on normal. If you switch to hard, the tiles are all the same color when they're on the ground. Flip them, and their true colors show, but it's harder to plan out your moves when you can't see the colors on the ground. One little exception to this rule, some tiles, as I mentioned, have a white circle on them, and these continue to have a circle on them when they're on the ground, so not all tiles will be identical. This seems to me like an oversight rather than something intentional in the game. Moving up to the insane difficulty, the tiles are always the same color even when flipped. This changes it to a game of experimentation, really. You will still see the tiles flash when they're in the right place, but the other tiles, it's more trial and error. For tiles with the white circle on top, you don't see the circle until they're on the ground in the right spot. If insane doesn't sound sadistic enough for you, try the psychotic skill level. It's just like insane, except the tiles will only flash once when they're in their proper place. Unless you're paying really close attention, you'll probably end up reflipping tiles that are already where they need to be. Sounds painful to me, but the manual says that defeating the game on Psychotic is the only way to truly become the Grandmaster of the Grand Tile Flipping Festival and King of the planet Phromaj. These higher skill levels are not just an increased challenge, you get more points too. Those base point scores that I listed off when going through the levels, if you're playing on hard, double them, multiply them by 2. If you're playing on insane, multiply it by 3, and for psychotic, multiply it by 4. Didn't see that one coming, did you? Going back to the options menu, the next one down is credits. Rather than just a scrolling list of names and jobs, you see 3 separate screens, and you can cycle through them using one of the fire buttons or the D-pad up and down. You can only cycle through these screens in one direction, and then it's back to the options menu. The first screen has a pair of little flip-out logos in the top corners, left and right, and then separate listings for producer, executive producers, art direction, playtesters, manufacturer, and manual design. At the bottom, in larger text, it says Original Concept by Conrad Barski, and then in bold text below that, press fire to continue. The second credit screen still has the little flip-out logos at the top, and then a list of programmers, each in a different font. These names cycle through colors like a Llamasoft game and looks cool. It still has press fire to continue at the bottom in bold white text. The third and final screen is a list of animators. There is only one little flip-out logo here, top left, and on the right is King Fluffy casting lightning around the list of animators. Ironically, though, this is not animated. Below that, the music credits, and then in bold white text, press fire to exit. When you start up a new game, and between levels, you get the map screen to select the level. Any unlocked stage cycles colors, and you move between them using a wobbly alien dude in a spacesuit. Choosing a level may be a bit counterintuitive. You don't move around the map in 4 directions, but rather just use the D-pad up and down. Up to go to the next level up if unlocked, and down to go to the previous level. Down all the way is the Cheese World, and up all the way is the Fluffy Encounter if you've unlocked that far. The manual just says to use the D-pad to move around the different locations, which is technically accurate if a little misleading. Be careful though, sometimes pushing the D-pad direction once will move you 2 steps instead of 1. It's a hint of FlipOut's greatest flaw, in my opinion, but I'll dig into that later. The map screen shows Earth at the bottom. Much of North America is visible, set amidst a field of yellow 5-pointed stars. This map takes liberties with landmark locations, Yellowstone, Mount Rushmore, and especially Easter Island, which, contrary to what we see on the screen, is actually located in the southern hemisphere. You also have the Cheese World, Sphorical Diner, Planet Pigskin, Hoopla World, and the Zero Gravity Arena, sort of left to right along the top, and another space-suited alien with a red star on his lapel and a snazzy red hat is in the foreground in the bottom right corner. That's the Fluffy Encounter, the last level. Before each level, you'll see some text describing or giving you hints about the level you're about to play. As they wait for you to push a button and start the match, you'll see aliens milling about on the playfield doing their thing. A blue square in the top right corner of the screen lets you know which phase you're on and how many there are total, so it'll say like 2 out of 10, 1 out of 3, that sort of thing. When you complete a phase, you'll get the cheer, and the scoreboard reads, "You win," in blue letters. The scorekeeper then emerges from behind the scoreboard, riding a rocket-powered flying skateboard thing. He slowly and laboriously changes out the score in the midst of a big white cloud of activity. When he's done, he returns behind the scoreboard, peeks out, and chuckles. Here's what all this sounds like. Yes, it really does take that long, 12 seconds from the end of the cheering. I have had it take longer though, over 15 seconds, maybe depending on how much activity is on screen. If you don't want to wait, you don't have to. You can just hit a button and your new score is displayed, and then you can push a button to start the next phase, or if you just finished the last phase, return to the map screen. The graphics in the game are largely computer-generated, CGI set pieces, CGI characters, everything ray-traced and pre-rendered. The characters themselves have multiple frames of animation. You can see them turn all the way around, walk, jump, other little animations. One of the characters, for example, knocks the side of his head, which dislodges both of his eyeballs, which he then hands off from one arm to the other before smacking back into his head. He'll do this over and over. It's like a fidget cube, but with eyeballs instead. Remember, kids, this is a weird alien guy. He's able to do this, you aren't. So please, don't try this at home. Everything is viewed from sort of a 3D perspective, isometric or axonometric or whatever the proper term is. You will notice some dips in frame rate here and there, especially around the circle wipes. The wipe animation can be pretty choppy, but the frame rate improves as soon as the wipe is complete. The responsiveness of your cursor may also be affected by the on-screen action. The sound effects in the game include tile flips and clinks, the level start, cheering when the level ends, and then the scoreboard thing. We'll just pretend I pushed the button there to skip the rest. There's the crash and therefore loss. And all the rest of the noises are alien sounds, spectators and competitors, and there are a handful of those. The music is a subdued mixture of original and classical arrangements. For example, Mozart's Invention 13 in the map screen. Both Mozart and Bach are credited for the music, in addition to the two mics, Beaumont and Taylor. I didn't specifically ask how the music is arranged here, but after listening closely to the Easter Island level music, I think mod files are a decent guess. The didgeridoo plays longer at a lower pitch, which happens in mod music, but this isn't conclusive proof. The songs all loop around, ranging from a mere 9.7 seconds long on Easter Island to 1 minute 44 seconds long at the Sforkle Diner. There are a few cheat codes listed on Atari Age. From the map screen, if you enter the sequence 7798899, it'll unlock all the levels. You'll hear the sound to confirm, and all the previously locked and gray levels will unlock and start cycling colors. The next code is a way to win the current phase you're playing, the current match, and that's a similar code, 779889 and hash. You have to do this before gameplay starts, and it may take multiple tries before it works. Finally, there's an Easter egg to replace the cheerleaders with the heads of some of the programmers. For any level that includes the cheerleaders, before gameplay starts, enter the sequence 14283722. Again, it may take multiple attempts, but when it works, it's unmistakable. You'll hear this sound repeated every 5.6 seconds. The music changes to the Fluffy encounter, and instead of the cheerleaders, you have 3 heads. I forgot to ask who these guys are exactly, but the first 2 are in color and fit on the cheerleader stand. The third is much larger and in shades of gray. Each one has its own animation. The one on the left, the eyes have been painted over with like white and black cartoon eyes, and a gigantic white smile grows and recedes. Kind of Cheshire Cat-like. The one in the middle, the guy's wearing glasses, and large glowing red eyes appear over his head. The third, the grayscale one, his face morphs into a kind of a demon face with horns, pointed ears, and a pointed chin before morphing back into the regular head. You play the game like this, the laughing continues during gameplay. The laugh, of course, is the scorekeeper's laugh, just slowed down by about 43%. By the next phase, the cheerleaders are back, as is the regular level music. I include bugs in this part of the show, and I don't really have any bugs to speak of, except sometimes a note gets stuck. Even if you mute the music, you can still hear this note until sufficient sound effects replace it. This happened to me a handful of times while researching this episode. But what happens more frequently, and I'm sure you're bound to notice this if you spend any time with FlipOut, is that the controls aren't reliable. Sometimes one press of the D-pad moves 2 spaces, and sometimes a button press doesn't register. That's a big problem in a game like this. It happens throughout and can be a major source of frustration. It could also be why it usually takes several attempts to successfully enter a cheat code. We have an updated box design for the Atari-published games, starting with FlipOut. It's not a major change, more of a minor refresh that adds a white glow around the Jaguar logo in the bottom right corner, a more 3D spherical look in the yellow circles behind the text 64-bit, and a different font for the text interactive multimedia system along the bottom. It's thinner, more angular, and technical looking. The rest of the box fits with the usual design language, artwork covering all but the left and bottom edge, screenshot in the bottom left corner, Jaguar logo, as I said, in the bottom right. Except now the screenshot is rectangular, squared off edges, unlike the previous boxes which had kind of a rounded CRT TV look. The text FlipOut is yellow with hard polygonal edges, sharp edges, except for the O, which is nice and smooth. The letters have a 3D beveled look. The artwork features the cheese world beneath a cloudy purple sky, could be an aurora or maybe a distant nebula, with a pair of rocky worlds in the top right corner. You see a grid of 9 tiles, with 3 of the tiles flying up into the air in front of King Fluffy doing his lightning levitation thing. There are several aliens scattered about, the Red Baron, Sluggy, a cheerleader, the cursor decoy, and several spectators. If you look closely, in the top left corner of the box, there are a pair of eyes, like a red space slime hanging down from the top of the box, but you just see the eyes and the eye stalks, barely. The screenshot on the front is from Hoopla World, Phase 1 of 10, and around back you have screenshots for the Zero Gravity Arena, Mount Rushmore, Easter Island, and the Sphorical Diner. All of these are on the first phase, except for Mount Rushmore, which is on the second. There are a couple of aliens mixed in too, separate from the screenshots, the Cursor Decoy and Sluggy. The text on the back is in English, German, and French, and I'll read the English version now. The headline reads, Alien Encounters of a Flipping Kind, and this is the text. Congratulations, Earthling! The citizens of planet Phromaj have invited you to join their great tile flipping festival in honor of the highest sort. Tile flipping influences their customs, their eating habits, and even their vacations. Solve maddening puzzles while watching for mischievous aliens who think confusing you is part of the fun. If they weren't so cute, you'd wring their necks. If they had them. There are a few bullet points. 9 wacky areas with multiple games in each area. 4 difficulty levels from normal to psychotic. 12 kinds of crazy aliens. The label on the cartridge features a portion of the artwork from the box, including most of the tile grid, and the name of the game added in too, which is helpful. The manual is a 36-page stapled booklet, including the outer covers. It is written entirely in English, and not translated to other languages like the usual French and German. The quirky font that they use throughout this manual has inconsistent character widths and heights, like tiny lowercase e's and squished g's that lack descenders below the baseline, to use the typography terms. There is a single page dedicated to each competitor, and each one with a large picture. You'll also find some of the level descriptions, and the usual stuff like controls, gameplay, saving and loading, and the credits. Like Hoverstrike, the rear cover of the manual features an element of the game. This time it's the cursor decoy, the striped squares with big googly eyes. As to why the manual was not translated to other languages, I can't say. A third-party company called the Beeline Group handled the manual and packaging, but they did the manual for several Jaguar games, manuals which did include French and German as well as English, so I don't know. Arethius asked me this question specifically, and I passed it on to Conrad Barski, but he didn't know either, which is totally understandable. It was a long shot anyway. FlipOut is not listed at all in the Atari Jaguar Gamer's Guide, but this is the first game I'm covering that was involved in Atari's postcard marketing campaign. Atari sent out postcards for several of its games, and I was on the mailing list, so I got a copy of these as well, and saved them over the years. I'll include a scan of it in the show notes, but what it looks like is on one side, the main picture side, there's a portion of the box art, cropped, much like the cartridge label is, but this one has the Jaguar claw marks along the left side. The only text here is the Atari logo in the top left corner, the game title, and the words available for Jaguar using the Jaguar logo. Around back, or is it the front, the side with the address, I don't know if that's back or front really. The left half is black and describes the game. The right half is the mailing information, plus the text, to locate the Jaguar dealer nearest you, call 1-800-GO-ATARI. If you call this number now, you won't get Atari. You'll get a carpenter in Roseville, California. Placer Woodworks, they're called, makers of fine custom furniture, decorative pieces, cutting boards, and butcher blocks. So maybe if you wanted a cutting board in the shape of an Atari logo, they can hook you up. But otherwise, no, they don't know any Jaguar dealers. Along the left side of this postcard, as I said, is a description of the game, somewhat similar to the back of the box, and the bullet points have been elaborated upon, but this adds one more. Creative graphics bring the aliens to life. FlipOut at a store near you beginning in September. FlipOut was among the games featured in the print ad Connect the Dot, where the first page shows a big black dot on a white background with the text, "Can you connect the dot? If so, you're probably smart enough to figure out that paying $149 for a 64-bit Jaguar makes more sense than paying over $300 for a 32-bit system." The second page includes a few games, none of which I've covered yet, except FlipOut, and I'll include that little blurb in the show notes. If you remember, way back in the Kasumi Ninja episode, I mentioned that Ted Takuichi, the producer, printed up some t-shirts for the development team, and I believe this happened with FlipOut as well. Not the part about Ted Takuichi, he didn't work on this game, but there were t-shirts printed up. Scott from JagMod has one of these shirts, which he bought from Don Thomas, who was Atari's director of customer service at the time the game came out. The shirt, a picture of which I'll include in the show notes, features the title of the game in the same polygon-looking font, and King Fluffy doing his lightning thing, surrounded by the wizard, rodeo rider, and space slime. I think. It's a green blob with eyes. It's got the Jaguar logo and Guerrilla Systems logo at the bottom, so thank you very much, Scott, for sending this in. That's a really cool little piece of history you have. There are several reviews for FlipOut that I was able to find. I'm going to start with GamePro, October 1995. This is a half-page review penned by Scary Larry, who says that, quote, "Atari isn't using its bits wisely. While FlipOut is a funny and challenging game, it looks so 8-bit that it could have been done on the Game Boy," end quote. Agree to disagree there, Larry. He describes the game, says the stages are interesting, but the music and sound effects are annoying, dominated by, and I quote, "weird alien hillbilly music." It's kind of funny, actually. The squishing sound he calls alien farts, which he says are funny but distracting. In the end, wasting a graphics powerhouse like the Jaguar on this silly game is like using a power drill to scratch your back, he says. Not as addictive as Tetris, but if you liked clacks, you'll love FlipOut. Both these games involve tiles, but other than that, I personally consider them completely different. Anyway, the ratings out of 5 are 3.0 for graphics, 3.0 for sound, 3.0 for control, and 2.5 for fun factor. He managed to fit in 3 pro tips, one beneath each picture. Wait until a tile has almost landed before you toss another. This reduces the chances of missing your cue. I disagree with that one myself. Pause the game to peek at the colored landing spots under the tiles. Formulate your game plan using this info. The screenshot above this pro tip shows not the paused screen, but the in-game options menu. If you press pause, the big paused graphic tends to obscure most of the game board, but if you push option, you can see through the text pretty well. I'm not terribly sure how helpful this one is either. In the spherical diner, flip one tile continuously until the aliens leave. Yes, this is good advice here. GamePro's arch enemy Electronic Gaming Monthly reviewed FlipOut in their September 1995 issue, with the 4 reviewers awarding scores of 6.5, 3.5, 6.0, and 4.5 out of 10. One reviewer says that the game is easy to jump into, but the challenge subsides after 20 or 30 minutes. Another calls the game boring, saying that it takes so long to flip the tiles into place that you lose interest, and that it's hard to tell where the tiles will land. Okay, this makes me think that he didn't really understand how the game works. It's almost like he was flipping tiles at random until they happened to land where they were supposed to go, doesn't it? If that's how the game actually worked, then yeah, I guess I'd find that boring too. Back to his review, he says that he liked the tile drawings and flip animation, but said that the backgrounds look too grainy. The next reviewer had a similar complaint, saying that the game seemed very random, and that the way to win was to not flip a tile once it was in place. The control is very well done, but the actual game is tedious, too simplistic, too boring. Yeah, I think he was just randomly flipping tiles too. The fourth reviewer here may have been in the same boat, but I'm not sure. He said that it takes a while to get used to and also bored him after a while. A decent concept, he says, but not enough to keep his attention. Next Generation magazine, September 1995, has a quick review of FlipOut with a single screenshot of the Easter Island level. The text reads, "FlipOut is an enjoyable and original puzzler on a system sadly devoid of them." It goes on to say that the game is more fun than it sounds, and this is no Tetris clone. It requires a novel mode of thinking to succeed. Their score, 3 stars out of 5. Game Players magazine, September 1995, gives the following scores for FlipOut. On a scale of 1 to 10, graphics 8, extremely sharp looking but not pushing any limits. Music and sound 8, what's there is done well. Innovation 9, totally different and changes from level to level. Gameplay 7, addictive but not exactly the reason you'd buy a 64-bit system. Replay value is also 7, good variety in levels but no versus mode. The overall score is 73%. He says that the actual puzzles aren't that hard, but the difficulty comes from the alien interference that you can't control. You can do everything perfectly, he says, but still lose because of some freak alien maneuver. In the end, it's a welcome addition to any Jaguar library. Video Games magazine reviewed FlipOut in their September 1995 issue, a garishly colored full-page review with 3 actual people chiming in. The main reviewer got a kick out of the whole cheese planet thing and said that the game, which is a lot like juggling, is okay for a while, but quickly grows tiring, eventually feeling redundant and dull. She said that it doesn't look very appealing, not clean like Tetris or Puyo Puyo. On a scale of 1 to 10, she rates graphics a 6, saying that there are some nice rendered aliens. Sound and music is a 5, serviceable, and playability is given a 7, as frustrating as it is addictive. Her overall rating is 6 out of 10. The 2 other reviewers liked the game a bit more, giving it an 8 and a 7 respectively, the latter saying that if you play the game too long, you're bound to bust a few blood vessels. Let's see what Arethius has for us. Arethius, of the Atari Gaming Connection in France, has been scouring French and German press for reviews and then helpfully sending in translations. We shall start with French publication ST Magazine. The reviewer gives graphics 55%, sound 75%, fluidity 65%, playability 70%, fun 75%, for an average score of 68%. Here's how he sums up the game. If you like this type of game, you may enjoy FlipOut. It is, however, too bad that the fun is somehow undermined by the relative ugliness of the game. It is not only not really pretty, it is also quite messy. The isometric 3D is not always very clear. The worst part of it is the documentation written in English only. The chosen font is so horrible and the layout is so messy that it becomes almost unreadable. To be a little more positive, the game offers quite a lot of levels. I played through 43 myself, which I had a bit of a good time. You can save your progression every level, and the music is nice. I am quite ambivalent about this one. I would recommend you test it first before buying it. Okay, that was ST Magazine. Switching to German reviews, we first have Mega Fun, November 1995. The reviewer says, translated to English, okay, I'm not sure what she's trying to say here. I have the translation from Arethius, and I did also run this through Google Translate, so I'm going to read off both of these translations here, since I can't figure out what this means. Arethius translates her first sentence as, I was about to believe this multicolored orgy was on screen. Google Translate says, every time the screen looked like a colorful confetti orgy, I was close to believing in that translation opportunity. I like Arethius' version better, but this whole about to believe or close to believing part, that throws me off. Maybe she was about to believe that she was watching a colorful confetti orgy on the screen? I don't know, that's my best guess. The rest of the summary makes more sense when translated. It reads, confusing games are not for everyone, but this multicolored puzzler is really solid and challenging. Fans of thinking games will find an interesting 3D example of this genre, diverse with its many different stages. Accompanied by fun music and the cute drawn extraterrestrials, you will find yourself quite quickly moving up the levels. Well, at least on the normal difficulty. The other difficulty levels are exactly as they sound, insane and psychotic. Scores from MegaFun are graphics 68%, sound 60%, and fun 69%. In electronic media, a final but pre-release build of FlipOut was reviewed in Atari Explorer Online, July 1995. Adam Urbano did the honors. He attended that media event that I mentioned earlier, and says that the game is much simpler to play than to explain. He says that the game's graphics are above par, especially the tiles and claymation-type characters. Sound effects are minimal, but great. He refers to the squishing sound effect instead of calling it a fart noise. Score 1 for Adam, and he says that the difficulty descriptions are about as accurate a description as one could ask for, with the higher ones being impossible for mortals. He calls the controls quick and responsive, and the gameplay isn't as thought-provoking as something like Lemmings, but easy to learn. In the end, this is a solid puzzle game that should entertain most users. Nothing that is necessarily new or groundbreaking, but is certainly a fun game. On a scale of 1 to 5, he rates controls a 5, gameplay 3.5, graphics 4, sound 3.5, and overall 4. That equates to a score of 8 out of 10. This does drop to 6 out of 10 when Jaguar Explorer Online takes over in March 1997. Game Zero, another online source, had 2 reviewers tackle this game, and their scores combined to be 68%. Both reviewers finished the game in about 3 hours, not finding much challenge before the zero-gravity arena level. One said that the control was smooth, and the other said that it left something to be desired. I'll include a couple of modern reviews here, too. The first from German website nextgame.de, June 2013. This translation is provided by Arethius as well. The reviewer says that he had fun once he figured it out, but there wasn't enough variety, and the graphics, while nice, didn't really add anything to the game. Final score, 5.6. Out of 10, I'm guessing. Reader score was 7.3. And finally, we'll check in with a video game critic, who gave the game a grade of F in his 2016 review. He says that it is confusing until you get the hang of it, and just tedious after that. He said that Atari tried to use whimsical music and fart sound effects to distract you from how much fun you weren't having. 42 reader votes average out to a grade of C. Atari Age has some external reviews listed, 40% from Atari Gaming Headquarters and 80% from Just Claws. Before I continue, how about a brief message from a fellow podcast?
Hey everyone, this is Michael, one of the hosts of the Atari XEGS Cart by Cart podcast. Do you like Atari? Of course you do. What about the 8-bit computer line? It was one of the best. Well, how about you consider joining Bill, David, Kieran, and myself as we review the cartridge-based games for Atari's 8-bit computer line. We also review budget games which are mostly released only in the UK. But that's not all. We also dig up game history, share personal experiences, and perform questionable comedy. You'll get all of that, and for free, just by listening to us on either iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play Music, Player FM, or from our website at xegs8bit.com. That's xegs, the number 8bit.com. And when you're done listening, please send us your hate mail, because we really need the feedback so we know someone is tuning in.
Atari Age assigns a rarity of 4 out of 10. The higher the number, the more rare the game. I see FlipOut listed on Atari vendors BNC Computer Visions, new for $40, and on the Goat Store, used with manual and a poor quality box for $16. Recent sales on eBay seem to be around $25 complete with box and manual, though I do see one still in factory shrink wrap sell for $15.40, which is a steal. Current listings, I see the cartridge loose for between $8 and $20, complete for $20 to $30. This game looks to be pretty easy to get, and not very expensive. There are no high scores that I could find, nothing on the Atari Age High Score Club. I even checked Twin Galaxies, and they have no records for this game. My own personal high score, for what it's worth, is 7,773. I mentioned earlier how FlipOut was ported to the PC, DOS, and Windows. The same version works on both. It's mostly just a question of how the interface looks, the menu screen. Does it use the Windows APIs, or does it use a separate DOS-compatible menu? The PC version came on CD and has a long and obnoxious series of full-motion video animations that, thankfully, you can skip. It shows various Phromaj aliens coming to Earth and getting into unamusing mischief. Other than that, it has updated music, including new tracks for Planet Pigskin and Hoopla World. Sounds like actual instruments, but there's some fuzziness to all the songs. They weren't mastered very cleanly, I guess. Let me give you a couple examples. Here's the intro song. And some of what we are familiar with as the Cheese World level. There are some additional levels in this version too, like Disco Inferno, the Savage Land, Enchantment Under the Sea, Flipurbia, and the Gooey Organic Caves. There are additional competitors to match, such as the Space Spider, Weatherbug, Suckerfish, and of course, Tarzana Nana Bo Banana. The graphics are improved over the Jaguar version since the game runs at, I believe, 640 by 480 resolution, roughly double what a TV can do. It looks a lot sharper. Other differences, the phase number isn't just a blue square in the corner, it's held up as signs by the cheerleaders, or launched by little geysers on the ridge, or presented as speech bubbles from 3 of our greatest presidents. Controls are versatile. You can use the keyboard, mouse, or joystick to control the game, and it feels tighter, especially on the keyboard. One more difference I'd like to point out, the scoreboard guy goes about his job a whole lot faster than he does on the Jaguar. The game in general feels a whole lot faster. Part of that could be due to the fact that I was running this on a modern CPU. Well, modern as of 2015, but close enough. For the most part, I've held off on sharing my thoughts about FlipOut, but that's coming right up, just after the music. What music? This music. FlipOut was another one of my full retail purchases at Walden Software in 1995. I had a decent job and few expenses back then, which was a recipe for building out my Jaguar collection as the games were released. Nothing specifically made me want to go out and get this game, it just looked like a fun little puzzle game. I think I read the write-up about it in Atari Explorer Online, so I bought the game. I played it, it was fine, the music was catchy, the graphics looked nice, especially the tiles as they were flipping through the air. The pre-rendered CGI look was, more sophisticated than what you would get if they were all hand-drawn sprites and background graphics. I found the game pretty easy to get into once you figured out the mechanics. It's pretty easy to get in the zone. As one of the reviewers mentioned, the challenge and difficulty really does come from alien interference, and I think that was the point all along. They're game elements, you have to work around them. Easter Island is kind of an exception. Dealing with the opening and closing mouths adds challenge without it being overtly extraterrestrial in origin. Going through the levels, I didn't much care for Easter Island or Mount Rushmore. I found the Sphorical Diner to be a pleasant return to form. The Zero Gravity Arena, some of the colors are so similar, and the ones along the left edge are hard to see, so I usually end up flipping one spot on the field, juggling those 2 tiles as I scan the board and look for something that isn't flashing. I couldn't imagine playing this on Psychotic. My daughter, when she was little, so let's say around 2010, she really liked this game. She liked watching me play it. I mean, she didn't try it out at all. I would totally impress her by making all my moves and then setting the controller down on the floor while the last 3 tiles clinked into place. As I said, it's easy to get into the zone here in this game, and once you're there, barring any alien meddling, you can totally controller drop and watch your victory unfold before you. It's highly satisfying. The first time I beat the game was at her request. I picked up from a saved game in the Zero Gravity Arena and finished it off from there. A few months later, though, she wanted me to play it again, and this time from the very beginning. I wasn't in the mood, I didn't feel like playing FlipOut, let alone starting over from scratch, but I did. I played straight through and beat the game, and that's where my high score comes from. I love the ending of the game. I find it delightful. The game overall, well, there are pros and cons. What I like about FlipOut is that it's a neat concept. The tiles look fantastic, and I can't get enough of that clinking sound. Oh yeah, there it is. The game is non-violent, and the aliens do make it challenging. The patterns on the ground, I don't think they change between separate games, but the tile positions and aliens add sufficient randomness to promote replayability. I think the level variety is pretty good, though they seem to be running out of ideas around Hoopla World and Planet Pigskin. I like that you get a higher score depending on the difficulty level you're playing. I think that a lot of games miss out on this little mechanic, so it's good to see it in action here. What I dislike about FlipOut really boils down to one thing, and that's the controls. Many times I push once on the D-pad and the cursor moves 2 spots. This is especially true with a lot of activity on the screen or in the zero-gravity arena. I need to move my cursor over to the left 2 spaces and it moves 3. It happens a lot. As I mentioned earlier, it happens on the map screen, for crying out loud. Pushing the button to flip the tile sometimes doesn't flip the tile. Again, I point to the zero-gravity arena as the big offender. It doesn't register, so I find myself repeatedly tapping the button on each space to get the tile to flip, and this often has unintended consequences. Other complaints. It really does take a long time for the scorekeeper to lay down your new score. You can skip it, sure, but it doesn't need to take so long. A 2-player mode might have been cool, where the second player controls a competitor or can cycle between competitors using the keypad. That might have been interesting, but my main complaint is about the inconsistent controls. How will that affect my rating? Let's find out. But first, a quick refresher on the rating scale we use here on the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, just in case you're new to the show or if you've forgotten since the last episode, which was a while ago. Anyway, the top of the scale is Hall of Fame. These are the top 5 games on the Jaguar. Below this is the rating Solid. That's for games that are really good, but not in the top 5. On the flip side of Solid is Meh, games that you don't really care for one reason or another. And then at the bottom of the scale are the 5 trash games, the worst games on the Jaguar. I am giving FlipOut a rating of Solid. Despite its big flaw, I do really like this one. The concept is neat, many of the graphics look great, and being in the zone is addictive. But my opinion is only part of this show. I'd really like to know what you, the listeners, think of FlipOut. So I asked. On Facebook, I posted a scan of the FlipOut postcard I received, and well, I screwed it up. See, I changed out the address to something fictional, but after posting it and going back the next day, it looked off. It didn't line up quite right. That bugged me. I'm a little obsessive-compulsive about, just about everything, so I fixed the alignment and made some other little font tweaks, and then went over to Facebook to swap out the image. Only Facebook doesn't let you swap out an image. You can edit the text, but that's it. And if I tried to delete it, Facebook said that I would be deleting the entire post, which I didn't want because I already had comments on that post. I even installed the Facebook app on my phone because a couple of users out there on the internet had success changing photos using the app instead of the website. But that feature, if it was present at some point, it isn't there now. There's an image annotation feature in the app where you can draw on top of the photo, but that didn't seem to work either. So then I went to my photo gallery, I saw the postcard picture there, and thought maybe I could delete the image from the gallery and then reinsert it into the original post. There's no warning that if you delete an image from the gallery, it'll delete the post it's attached to, because what kind of sense does that make? So I deleted the image, and the post was gone. The original post, all the comments, gone. Fortunately, I had set up email notifications for the Jaguar Game by Game podcast page on Facebook, and those did work, so I still had a local copy of all the comments on the original FlipOut thread, so here they are. Robert Anthony Martinez Rivero says, I would give it a solid rating. FlipOut has some issues, but it's really a fun puzzle game, and you can tell people really had fun making it, and the aliens themselves are devious little demons. Derek says, have you tried calling 1-800-GO-ATARI for more info? Which I haven't, but I looked up the number, which I said before now belongs to a carpentry company. Atari kept this number for a while, I think, through the Hasbro Interactive days. Randal says, so you live somewhere in Kansas? No, never lived in Kansas. I think I might have driven through Kansas once or twice in my lifetime, early on, family road trips in the back of the yellow station wagon with the faux wood paneling. I would like to go there someday, to Kansas. There's a space museum there, a really good one from what I've heard. It's not close to anything, I don't think, but they've got a lot of cool stuff there. Several flown spacecraft, Gemini, Apollo, I think Mercury, maybe a Soviet spacecraft or two. I think they even have a V2 rocket. I seem to remember reading that. So that's on my list for someday if I'm ever in the area, which I can't see why I would be, but you never know. Randal goes on to say, I got one of those postcards for Super Burnout. FlipOut stinks, by the way. Yeah, I have several of the postcards, maybe a complete set, I don't know, and Super Burnout is among those. When's that game coming up? Bishop, which episode is Super Burnout?
Super Burnout is scheduled for episode 30.
Okay, cool, so not that far off.
At the rate you're going, it will be released November of 2019.
Yeah, thanks for the vote of confidence. Let's move on to Björn, who says, I displayed it at the retro booth at Gamescom a few years ago. Only a few people figured out how to play it without any help. Maybe that's the problem with the game. Unlike Tetris, this game is not easy to learn and hard to master. Therefore, it gets a meh from me. Yeah, comparing this to Tetris, FlipOut is not in the same league. Tetris, I think, even if you've never seen it before, you could figure out how to play it in seconds, a minute tops. FlipOut, I honestly think the reviewers at Electronic Gaming Monthly, at least 2 of them, didn't figure it out at all. They seem to think that the tile destinations were purely random. So there is definitely more of a learning curve than something like Tetris, but once you get it, I think it's good fun. RD says, I remember getting this postcard. I bought this game shortly after release and remember being fairly disappointed with it. The creatures on the box art seemed like they'd have some personality, but I found them kind of annoying. The puzzle aspect of the game I also found lacking. When I tried to play it, I soon got bored and found myself reaching to play clacks on the links instead. FlipOut isn't trash, but definitely falls into meh territory for me. Thank you, RD. Clacks on the Links is a great game. I've played it mostly on the PSP and original Xbox as part of Midway Arcade collections, but I do have it on the Links as well. Well, okay, my brother had it on the Links, but he gave me his collection and I have tried it out, but not for very long. I'm sure I'll get more playtime on it when Mark covers it for his Atari Lynx Handycast. Now over to the current thread on Facebook, the one with the fixed photo. Derek points out the dangling space blob eyes and says, those eyes, those horrible eyes. I don't mind playing this game once in a while. The puzzles near the end are a little too complex for me. I swear I sometimes press the flip button and nothing happens. Meh from me. That happens to me too, Derek. It's not just you. And Roberth reposted his comments since I had inadvertently nuked the old one, saying, I would rank it as a solid title for the system. It has flaws, sure, but it really is a lot of fun once you get the hang of how the game works, and you can tell the team had a lot of fun working on the game, which is really rare to see these days on modern game development. Yeah, that doesn't seem to be the case these days, does it? I have a copy of the documentary called Indie Game, the movie, which covers some of the challenges in modern game development, indie games, and you see a lot of love of the craft evident from these developers, but not a whole lot of what I would call having fun. Taking a look at the forums, we've got some feedback on Atari Age from Dr. Clue. He wrote, very simply, playing FlipOut, you have to juggle multiple tiles while the curiosity of the aliens causes them to get out onto the playboard and weigh down the tiles and so forth. This is as enjoyable as trying to get things done around your house, or even saying typing this message, and a cat being right there in your business, either on your keyboard or mouse, which my cat currently is. Yep, about that fun. So good, kinda cute, even frustrating. My sales pitch for FlipOut if I made a commercial: if you know how to work around cats, you'll mildly enjoy this game. Alright, thank you, Dr. Clue. We have a cat named Khaleesi, and she walked into my office earlier when I was recording. I thought that she would get in the way, hop up on the desk and brush up against the microphone or something, but she didn't. It's mostly around breakfast time when she becomes a nuisance. She'll jump onto my desk, sometimes try to jump onto me with claws assisting and everything. And oftentimes she'll hover her tail over my coffee as some sort of threat. Something like, feed me or the coffee gets furry. That's low, man, that's really low, so I go and feed her. This cat, she finds a way to get what she wants, and she's afraid of nothing, and that's how she got the name Khaleesi. Hey, Bishop, were there any text or audio submissions for FlipOut sent to Jaguar at GameByGamePodcast.com?
Yes, one text submission. There is also feedback from past games.
Okay, sounds great. Please queue up the FlipOut specific feedback first.
Ready.
Alright, this message is from Arethius. He says, Hi Shinto. Here are my thoughts about FlipOut. I think every system back then, at least for the 3rd and 4th generation, had to have an arcadey puzzle game. Atari failed to secure Tetrasphere for the Jaguar and had to fill the void by any means, and so we got FlipOut. Yeah, what la yuck. I think doing an arcade puzzle game is not a simple task, even if the goal of the game is simple. It has to be fun, easy to learn, hard to master, and addictive. Tetris is fun, even on the CDI, although it is one of the weakest, if not the weakest, version of all. Columns is fun, Bubble Bubble is fun, Dr. Mario is fun, Clax is fun, but FlipOut is boring and unfair. Although the game does provide some nice ideas, the idea of matching tile with a color on the bases is simple, the idea to flip one in another tile is simple, the idea of changing the tile's form is a nice touch as well, although I feel I play always with the same type of tiles. The music is okay, forgettable, but somehow fits the game. The controls are okay, but I think they are a bit tricky, and sometimes I am flipping the tile I do not want to flip. And finally, the distractions, such as cowboys or the fake bouncer, they are nice touches and give a dose of challenge to the game. And all of this could have been fun and addictive if the game had been better polished. And if this would have been all, I think I would have given this game a solid rating, but I can't. Here are the reasons why. Some of the distractions are really annoying, the pain in the kind of annoying, such as the slime thing that destroys the tiles, or at least it seems so to me. Every time it comes on a tile, I get the impression that the game freezes and my tile crashes on the ground, although I had plenty of time, but it shouldn't have happened. And I find it outrageous. It always gives me the will to shout and yell at this game. There's no warning you can prepare yourself to face such things. The last world is boring and frustrating once you get past the first level. The sound of the score table is annoying after 10 levels of this sound. Oh, it wants me to insert the sound clip here. Here we go. This is irritating, right? And the normal difficulty levels are somehow weird. Normal and hard are quite easy. I actually find hard to be easier than normal. And I can't see why exactly, but this is how I feel. But the other two difficulty levels, insane and psychotic, are way too hard for the average human being that I am. But I think the gameplay changes they bring into the game are a nice idea, and I think FlipOut is the only game on the Jaguar where difficulty levels actually have an impact on gameplay, and that's a good thing. But it doesn't make it great either. I personally finished the game twice, once on normal and the second time on hard, but I won't come back for it, for several reasons. First, the insane and psychotic are just as they're called, insane and psychotic. 2, the game is relatively boring. 3, there are no lives in the game and no penalty when you lose, and in the end it makes the quest for a high score some kind of bad joke. 4, there are better games on the Jaguar that I did not finish, and those deserve my attention more than FlipOut. For me, FlipOut is a meh title and a really poor replacement for Tetrasphere. That's it for me today. I have a question for your next episode, and I will send it to you with the reviews I find. Keep up the excellent job. The more I listen to your podcast, the more I want to make my own, but I still hesitate. Do you think a CDI by CDI podcast would be of interest to anyone but me? If I decide to start one, would you mind giving me some tips? Anyway, this is not something I will be doing soon, so just keep up the good work on the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, because I really think you are great. P.S. The RGC 2018 will be held on October 27th and 28th, and everyone is welcome, even if they live in the U.S. Thank you, Arethius. Yeah, RGC 2018 is coming up. That's the show which is held outside Paris this year in a town called Meaux, M-E-A-U-X. I will not be there, unfortunately. Wish I could. A Philips CDI Game by Game podcast. I'd listen to that. I know very little about the CDI. You bring up some good points in your message, things that I missed, so let's go back through it and dig in a little bit more. You mentioned Tetris and Columns and Clax and Dr. Mario, and it says Bubble Bubble here, but I think you might have meant Puzzle Bobble, Bust-A-Move as it's called here in the States. These are all great puzzle games, and, well, I can't speak to Dr. Mario, I've never played that one, but it's true that FlipOut does seem very different, and this goes back to something one of the magazine reviewers said. It doesn't look clean. It's a 3D sort of look and is very busy with all the aliens moving about, and I'd venture that most of the game is about dealing with competitors rather than solving puzzles, which is different from the other games you listed. This is all true, and I thought about it while doing research. Should FlipOut be classified as a puzzle game when it's so different from its contemporaries? And I don't know, I didn't land on an answer for that. I've been calling it a puzzle game all episode long, and I think that's for lack of a different classification, if anything fits better. You mentioned the slime thing that seems to cause you to lose when it shouldn't, and I understand that. There are enemies like the Red Baron and some of the others that take the place of a tile, so you have to keep an extra tile in the air, meaning at least 2. And sometimes you might have more than one of these guys blocking a spot on the ground, so you end up losing that way. And it's confusing. There's so much clutter going on the playfield that it's hard to tell which competitors are doing what. So you lose with multiple tiles in the air, and you just stare at the screen and say, "What? What just happened here? Why did I lose?" Probably with more expletives thrown in, of course. And yes, as you said, that is irritating. It's interesting that you found the hard difficulty easier. Maybe it's less distracting. I mean, you don't really care what the tile color is on the ground. You only really need to know if it's a matching color, whether or not it's flashing. So you can focus on the ones that aren't flashing without that extra visual element of color getting in the way. It sort of makes sense, though I can't necessarily say that's been my experience. Thank you, as always, Arethius, for your feedback and for your help with the magazine research, and if I could help out in your podcasting efforts in any way, I'd be happy to do so. Our general feedback is from TrekMD, and it looks like it covers FlipOut as well, so 2 for the price of 1. Very cool. He says, "I hope all things are well. I am now caught up with your episodes. Hopefully I will be able to stay current and provide more timely feedback. Speaking of feedback, here's feedback on the 3 past games in the game for the current episode. 1. Troy Aikman Football. Like you, I'm not a big fan of sports titles, but I do have this for the sake of keeping a complete collection for Atari's Big Cat. That means I won't have much to say for this one title. Have I played it? Yes. Do I like it? No. I would at least give it more of a chance if it looked good, but when those players start moving, it looks like such a mess that I would prefer to not even look. It is unfortunate because it does have plenty of plays in the playbook to choose from, and the audio isn't bad with the voice sampling that it has and the sound effects. This is one big meh for me. I'd much rather play Brutal Sports Football for its total lack of rules and head-chopping action. 2. Hover Strike. When I first read the story behind Hover Strike, I have to admit I was very intrigued. The concept sounded cool. You're in control of this tank in charge of saving whatever humans may be left from the invading Terrakians. These Terrakians are using human bodies in a factory as raw materials for organic compounds. The planet is heavily guarded, but your tank, which can use anti-gravity to maneuver over just about any type of terrain, has the weapons to destroy the land-based weapons and facilities of the Terrakians. Can you eliminate your enemies and save what humans are left? Well, I suppose. The problem is you may get bored trying to do it. Hover Strike is a title that may have been inspired by Battlezone, but it just doesn't have the same fun factor. While the game has decent graphics and sound, the action is just too slow and things are rather repetitive. Control of the hover tank is also a bit problematic. Moving is easy, but stopping can be a bit of a challenge. Overall, this is as meh as they come. Now, the CD version of the game, that will be a topic for another day. 3. Cannon Fodder. Looks can sometimes be deceiving, and that is certainly the case for Cannon Fodder. This game has graphics that may look a bit on the simple side with cartoonish characters for the player to control, but these actually belie just how much fun this game actually is. Cannon Fodder is a rather unique war game where you control a small battalion of men, 4 soldiers, as you try to complete a series of missions where you will be shooting at just about everything that moves. You use crosshairs to select your target, which can be enemy troops or buildings, push the move button for your battalion to start moving, and you can also make them shoot as they move. You will play in various environments, but no matter where your little team of soldiers is, your goal remains the same. Though the characters are cartoonish, the enemies wail quite nicely when they are shot, and there are plenty of blood splatters to go around. I know how morbid that sounds, but I don't mind it. In any case, though the game has no music while you are playing, the sound effects are very well done. If you want music, you get some just before you start and when you finish your missions. In fact, you'll even see your soldiers jumping for joy as the music plays. Cannon Fodder is a really cool game that should not be underestimated. I certainly recommend it to anyone with a Jaguar. And 4. FlipOut. I've always enjoyed puzzle games on consoles, so FlipOut is a game that I looked forward to playing when I purchased it. The game is supposed to take place in some cheese planet called Phromaj, and you're a participant in the Great Tile Flipping Festival. Your goal is to flip the tiles on various 3x3 grids until you match the tiles on the top of the grid with the tiles on the bottom of the grid. The trick is that you have one extra tile that does not belong and that you have to deal with in order to properly assemble the puzzled tiles. You do have an audience as you play in the form of a group of impertinent aliens who will jump on the grid and try to steal tiles. These guys are pretty much that, impertinent. As the game advances, things do become more difficult, and some of the puzzles can be quite frustrating. The game's controls are fairly simple, however. You use a cursor to select the tile with a joypad, and then any of the buttons will flip the tiles. This works just fine. The game music I would characterize as weird and rather forgettable also. Is this a game I will run home to play? No, not really. This one is part of the collection, but not one that I play much. If Atari wanted a tile game for the Jaguar, they should have made an updated version of Clax for the system. That would have been awesome. That's all for now. Hopefully Bishop found this email more manageable. I was laughing when it was complaining about the lots and lots of feedback with however many bytes of data, etc., when you were going to read my first email. Also amusing that Bishop is so confident that their plan of taking over the world is coming along. I think Voice said something about things not getting real until 2068. That's quite the wait. I believe it was 2084, wasn't it, being the year in which Robotron is set? I probably won't be around to see it, but I guess Bishop and Voice and the others are playing the long game. I don't even have a 5-year plan, let alone a 66-year plan, so good on them, I guess. An updated version of Clax would have been neat. That's a fun game, I like Clax. Even a simple port with improved graphics and high-colored backgrounds might have been nice on the Jaguar. A Clax 2000 sort of game with power-ups and additional challenges or something, that could have been interesting. It's an underutilized property. Atari could have done more with it, I think. Impertinent? Yeah, maybe. I'd say the spectators would be impertinent, but the competitors really are what add challenge to the game, or irritation depending on your point of view. They're a core gameplay component either way. Maybe, though, with more levels like Easter Island, or in the PC version, I believe the undersea level, the tiles are in clamshells which open and close sporadically. Maybe with more environmental complications, FlipOut could have done without the meddlesome competitors entirely, and it would have been a more straightforward puzzle game. Maybe. Oh, that reminds me, I never did talk about the game concepts, which were in the original proposal, but didn't make it into the final game. Thank you, TrekMD. I like hearing, or rather reading, your thoughts about the games, and I pretty much agree with what you said about Hover Strike and, what else, Troy Aikman and Cannon Fodder. Glad you're all caught up now, too. See, there are advantages to a slow, inconsistent release schedule.
What can I say except you're welcome?
Okay, the game proposal written by Mr. Barski, at the time Mr., not Dr., includes several storyboards, like a level start involving an alien moonrise which reveals the tile grid, this one 4x4, so 16 total tiles. Aliens fly in from all directions, and a chubby alien leader tosses the 17th tile into the air. The gameplay from here is pretty standard. The user moves the cursor around, launches a tile up in the air, and the one already in the air heads to the new empty spot. Aliens come in, sit down on empty spaces, and you have to flip them out of the way before you can use that surface again. And you may have to sacrifice tiles that have already been solved in order to keep playing around the alien interference. This is pretty much the final product. Mr. Barski envisioned different play modes, strategy and arcade, the strategy one with fewer aliens but less tile time in the air, and the arcade mode with more aliens but a longer hang time. The faster you solve the puzzle, the fewer aliens get involved. That's basically the final product as well. But what didn't make it is the C button to move the cursor around faster. Hold C to move faster, that's not in the final game. And the A button to zap all the aliens on the board. He uses the term Super Zapper, which is awesome.
Super Zapper Recharge.
As I said just a minute ago, the competitors are a core gameplay element, and you see that here in the design document. A simple tile-flipping game where all you do is flip and match the patterns on the ground, Mr. Barski says, can be summed up in one word: boring. He used all caps for this and 3 O's. It's the outside influence, he said, that would make the game addictive. He describes some aliens which didn't make it in, like a green spectator alien who stands on a tile and points in the direction it's supposed to go, and a green bully alien who scares the red competitors off the board. Sounds helpful, actually. Also helpful would have been an alien who walks in and switches 2 tiles around if he notices that one of them is in the wrong spot. There was to be an alien carrying helium balloons who would jump on the most recently flipped tile while it's in the air, and I think, though I'm not entirely sure from reading this, that he would hold on to it there in the air for a while until his balloons pop, essentially freeing you from having to worry about that one extra tile crashing. There was a red alien in disguise, so he looks like a regular harmless green alien, but then rips off his costume with an evil laugh to reveal his true redness. And there was to be a red tile switcher alien who swapped 2 tiles that may have been correctly placed. There was a control option listed here where you can push a button to see if a tile was placed correctly or not, which in the final game would have only made sense in the psychotic skill level. Oh, here's the big one. There was to be a special tile location on the board, and if you happen to launch that tile with an alien on top, that alien would fly into a special place on the screen. A basketball goal, alien police car, alien hot dog stand, those are examples here. And if you pull this off, you get a bomb, perhaps the Super Zapper bomb mentioned earlier, which temporarily clears the board of meddlesome aliens. He also envisioned mothership aliens, which would need to be conquered in one-on-one contests before the player can move on. He emphasizes that the game is non-violence, the aliens are always tossed, never killed, and, well, he says that the 4x4 grid would never change, just like the backgrounds would change, but that would preclude many of the levels in the final FlipOut. A lot of times you aren't flipping tiles, you're flipping food, or the faces of presidents, or aliens on geysers, and in different patterns on the ground. So the final game did definitely change from the original concept, which is probably inevitable, but a lot remained intact. The concept art, too, definitely defined the look of the final product. Ladies and gentlemen, green and red-skinned Phromaj, we have reached the end of my coverage of FlipOut for the Atari Jaguar. Before I wrap up the show, I have some parting wisdom from Dr. Barski, directed at anyone who is currently writing video games or might want to get into game design and development. He says, most computer games that are built and marketed to any significant degree are influenced heavily by marketing considerations, i.e. what they expect people want, and that many older, retro games have explored many distinct areas in the space of game design possibilities that were never revisited, and therefore, looking at old software and old ideas is definitely worth doing. Similarly, new developers that have the luxury of exploring ideas that aren't driven by market demand, such as folks in the homebrew scene, should definitely put some thought into exploring new game mechanics, because there's probably still plenty of simple ideas out there for the taking, ideas that let you create simple and fun gameplay. That's great. Thank you so much, Dr. Barski, if you're listening, for answering my questions. It was immeasurably helpful and added a lot of the backstory that I personally like hearing, and I think others who listen to this podcast like as well. Coming up in the next episode, what do we have? We have Power Drive Rally, followed by iWar, Flashback, and Supercross 3D. If you have any feedback on these upcoming games or any of the games that I've already covered, or about the show in general, please send that in, plain text or audio file, to jaguar@gamebygamepodcast.com. All show links can be found on the web at jaguar.gamebygamepodcast.com. Feel free to poke around gamebygamepodcast.com for other shows of a similar format that you might be interested in checking out as well. I just added the arcade-focused Lost in Nostalgia podcast. It's a limited-run show, so start at the beginning on that one, as well as a couple shows about the Sega Saturn. They don't quite fit the game-by-game format, but it's close enough. If you're interested, after the music, I've got some general status updates and stuff, followed by story time, where I have some anecdotes that were brought to mind while working on this episode. If you want to stick around for that, or even if you don't, please remember that there is a lot of good to be found out there in this world of ours, even with widely ridiculed video game consoles. So do try to keep an open mind and a joyful heart. Thank you for listening. Wow, it has been over 3 months since my last episode, and I see why some podcasters take a break over the summer. Not because I was traveling or going on any adventures, really, but because there's a lot going on down here at Casa del Shinto. My wife and kids went on a road trip to visit family last month. I stayed behind to hold down the fort, and take care of the animals. A pet sitter at this point is prohibitively expensive. We've got a very elderly Bouvier de Flandre dog who needs round-the-clock care. Ask me how I've been sleeping recently, so I stayed home. Now, this did give me time to join George and Greg, aka Soulblazer, on the SNES podcast. This has been a long time coming, about 18 months, but we were able to get together, online of course, and talk about Clay Fighter. That's their episode 101, link in the show notes. I had a lot of fun talking with these guys, including pre-show and post-show, and best of all, the power didn't cut out during recording. There was a raging thunderstorm outside at the time, and it fortunately did not interfere with the power or the audio. But that was just one night. What else have I been doing if not working on this podcast? And the answer is that I've been building a deck with my dad. The original deck on our house was shoddily assembled, the wood joists were rotting, the whole thing swayed in the breeze, which is not a good quality in the deck. So we tore it down, and my dad and I set out to work building a new deck, a bigger one, better built with composite decking surfaces. To save money, we decided to build it ourselves. My dad lives about 45 minutes away, he's retired, and I guess thought it would be a fun project to work on. A challenge, certainly, because neither of us have built a deck before. And this new deck design has a signature feature, an integrated octagon in one corner. So we'd be done by now, I'm sure, if not for that, but it will look really cool when it's done. Yeah, we're still working on it. I would work at the day job, and then he would come over in the evenings, and we'd work on the deck until it was way too dark to continue. All weekend long, too. So anytime I did have for podcast prep, that went into building a beautiful and sturdy deck. But it's one of those things. I'm spending time with my dad, something that we didn't do a whole lot growing up. So as far as I'm concerned, any lateness in this episode is totally worth it. One other thing I was able to get done, this has been bugging me for a while, is re-record my podcast music. The opening and closing themes and the intermission, they always seemed a little blown out to me. So I re-recorded them, made a few minor tweaks, brought the hi-hat way down in the mix, and I think the end result is a cleaner sound, a bit more fidelity. You may or may not have noticed, but I just mentioned a little while ago how OCD I can be about some things, so this has been on my list for a while. On a related note, I have been going through and cleaning up old episodes. I've learned a lot about audio editing in the course of this podcast, and I still get a lot of downloads on my old episodes, so I wanted to make those sound as good as I could without re-recording them. I may be fastidious, but I'm not crazy. I use Libsyn for a podcast host. I pay a monthly fee for uploading new content. Old content is retained as long as I maintain my subscription. On months where I've not been able to publish a proper formal episode, I still have to pay, but I figured, why not use these quiet months to update my old episodes? So that's what I did. I queued up remastered versions of the first 3 episodes, 0, 1, and 2, and when it became clear I wasn't going to be able to publish FlipOut before the end of July, I uploaded these episodes to Libsyn. Only I misunderstood how this works. I thought anything I upload in a month counts against my cap, but as it turns out, I can apparently replace episodes, and only the delta counts against my cap if the new file is larger. I'm still going to go through and remaster these old episodes. I've been keeping a list of all the little things that have always bugged me about each episode that I didn't think I could change without blowing my upload cap. As I go, I am updating the episode metadata with change date and list of changes. I like change logs in software, so I might as well do the same thing for podcast episodes too. On a few episodes in the past, I pitched the Jaguar Game by Game podcast store on Redbubble, where I sold original designs that were Jaguar related, but not overtly so. I went out of my way to avoid using the Jaguar logo or Atari logo or anything like that. Inspired by, you could say, inspired by the Jaguar and its games. And then one evening, I got a series of takedown notices where Atari claimed I was infringing on their intellectual property, and Atari actually sued Redbubble for what may amount to millions of dollars in damages for trademark infringement. I was gutted. I know it's not the same Atari that made the Jaguar, but still, my gushing fandom squashed down in impersonal form letters. And the worst part was that Atari claimed to own my work, essentially. But there's more to the story than that. I went on Redbubble the next day and searched for the word Atari. Practically nothing came up. So I think what they did is they put the ban hammer down on anything with Atari in the description. The one design I had that was not taken down, as a matter of fact, did not have the word Atari in the description. Although the word Atari is in the design, because it's the name of the podcast, the Atari Jaguar Game by Game podcast, they left that one alone. I don't know what I am going to do here. I can't re-upload the designs to Redbubble. Maybe if I alter them slightly, maybe they have checksums of the originals, so any modification would alter the checksum and no longer match. I might do that. I might try switching to Zazzle or some other on-demand vendor like that. I don't know.
Edit.
It's become clear to me since my initial recording that it's not just Redbubble affected by Atari's DMCA rampage. Don Crosswhite had original artwork taken down off of TeePublic, heard about that on the Robot Tank episode of the Atari 2600 Game by Game podcast. And Sean of the Atari 7800 Homebrew podcast had a sticker taken down, his podcast logo, on a sticker taken down off of Zazzle. So anything mentioning Atari on any of these sites, whether or not there's actual infringement involved, and don't get me wrong, there is actual trademark and copyright infringement going on, but anything anywhere with Atari in the description is fair game for a takedown request, it would seem.
End of edit.
My heart's just not in it right now. As I said, gutted. And that incident, I'm sad to say, really sours the brand for me. It's the antithesis of goodwill that they're spreading over there at Atari SA, and it's too bad. But with all that out of the way, let's get to some actual story time.
And now, story time with Shinto.
I mentioned the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, specifically the SEP field, and the whole family loves Hitchhiker's Guide. We make references to it frequently, and the SEP field, somebody else's problem, is a very real thing, especially when it comes to kids. My daughter was cleaning out her room. She's growing up, turning 13 later this year, and something that naturally comes along with adolescence is saying goodbye to your childhood. It's both terrifying and heartbreaking as a parent, but it is part of the process. And she hit this phase and decided to clear most everything out of her room. All of her old possessions that she's held on to for years ended up in bags. Lots of possessions, lots of bags. Stuff that she thought might belong to somebody else, she put on the kitchen table. The kitchen table became an SEP field. It was definitely like she could no longer see the stuff she dumped on the table. It was now somebody else's problem. It's a brilliant concept right there, Douglas Adams. And one more thing while I'm talking about Hitchhiker's Guide. My wife turned 42 a couple weeks ago. I'm just a little bit older than she is. I turned 42 a couple months prior. And we were going to order her a cake, the kids and I, but we were trying to think of what to write on it. We were out running errands, and it hit me. So our next stop was the bakery, and the kids and I walked up to the counter, and the girl behind the counter asked what we'd like written on the cake, and I asked her for the words, "Don't panic," in big friendly letters. I think she got the reference, actually, so good on her. When I picked up the cake a few days later, I laughed out loud when I saw it. It really did say, "Don't panic," in giant letters. It took up the entire surface of the quarter sheet cake. There was just enough room left over for a couple of candles, one shaped like the number 4 and a matching number 2, so it was perfect. My wife loved it. The rodeo rider. This conjures something from my childhood, that time when we went to an actual rodeo. Something happened there which I can't divest from the whole rodeo concept, even decades later. In the late 90s, I was visiting my girlfriend. She lived out of state. It was a long-distance sort of relationship, but it worked out. We've been together for 20 years, married for 18 of those, so no longer long distance, thank goodness. But back when we were dating, we were driving somewhere, and we passed a sign for a local rodeo. And I told her this story. I told her that, yeah, I went to the rodeo once when I was 5 and swallowed a Lifesaver. That's the ring-shaped hard candy for those who may not be familiar with Lifesavers. And of course that meant I was going to throw up in a few minutes. The clock was ticking. So, and then at that point I stopped telling the story, thought about it for a second and said, wait, why would swallowing hard candy necessarily result in involuntary vomiting? That made no sense. It's one of those things, a little factoid that your mom tells you as a kid, which you kind of file away as truth and never question again, no matter how little sense it makes. And another thing I was told as a kid was that if you don't eat your vegetables, you'll get little white spots in your forearms when you grow up. I don't know if there's any actual science to back that up. But back to the rodeo. Vomiting up hard candy was apparently an inevitable thing, and it did actually happen once when I was 3 or 4 in church. But we went to some of the vendor stands at the rodeo looking for bread because bread, apparently, stops this inevitable hard candy hurling process in its tracks. Another thing I accepted as fact and never questioned until that afternoon, driving down the road in my girlfriend's car. One of the rodeo vendors sold us a donut, and that did the trick. There was no candy chunder at the rodeo that day. If this is a thing and you've heard of it, please let me know. But in retrospect, I think there might have been some post hoc ergo propter hoc action going on here, some correlation and causation confusion, but hey, I got a free donut out of the deal. The next Christmas, I gave my girlfriend, fiancé at that point, a box of Lifesavers with a post-it note reading, "Warning, do not swallow whole." She still has it, unopened. Maybe it's not worth the risk, especially if we're, out of bread at the time. Bases and it moves 3. Oh, the printer is printing. Hold on. Canes and top hats are up on stage, illuminated by stoplights. Spotlights. They're illuminated by spotlight. On the flip side of this is meh. Oh, the printer's printing again. Hold on. Who's printing all this stuff?